The message from my parents arrived just after midnight. We need you to send $50,000 immediately. It's urgent. There was no explanation. No context. Just that single demand and the kind of tone that makes your chest tighten. Before your mind catches up, I stared at my phone, rereading it again and again. My first thought wasn't money. It was fear. I imagined hospital rooms, emergency calls, my father lying somewhere unable to speak. I called them right away, but the line went to voicemail. By morning, my nerves were shredded. When my mother finally called back, her voice sounded strained, but not the way I expected. She spoke carefully, choosing vague words, saying my father was under a lot of pressure and that things were complicated. Every time I asked for details, she deflected. When my father took the phone, he sounded annoyed rather than distressed. He told me I was overthinking it and reminded me that family helps without asking questions. That should have been my answer. For most of my life, it always had been. My name is Samantha, and I learned early what my place in my family was. I was the one who noticed problems before they were named. The one who filled in gaps quietly. If something needed fixing, I fixed it. If someone needed help, I stepped in. I didn't need to be asked. It was expected. On the surface, we were a normal family. A modest suburban house, polite neighbors, holiday dinners that looked perfect in photographs. But inside, there was an unspoken structure everyone followed. My father ruled through authority. His opinions weren't discussed. They were accepted. My mother managed emotions, smoothing tension by deciding who needed to bend so peace could be preserved. And then there was my younger sister, 5 years behind me, who somehow became the center everything revolved around. Being older meant being useful. I walked her to school, waited for her after activities, rearranged my plans to match her moods. If she cried, the household stopped. If I did, I was told to toughen up. Praise never landed where I stood. Teachers complimented my grades, and my parents nodded politely before redirecting the conversation to my sister's achievements. None of it was dramatic. That was the problem. It was constant, subtle, and shaping. By the time I left for college, I understood two things clearly. No one was going to hand me anything, and if I wanted a different life, I would have to build it alone. I worked relentlessly, kept my head down, and eventually moved far enough away that my family became something I visited instead of something I lived inside. Distance brought relief, but it didn't erase instinct. When my parents asked, I still felt compelled to respond. When they sounded serious, my body reacted before my brain. That reflex is what their message triggered. Still, something felt wrong. For the first time, I didn't send the money immediately. I sat with the request, letting the unease settle instead of pushing it aside. $50,000 wasn't a small ask, even for someone doing well. And they had never demanded a sum like that without a story attached. That night, I barely slept. My mind filled the silence with worst-case scenarios. By morning, I knew I couldn't just wire the money and hope for clarity later. So I did something unfamiliar. I booked a flight. I didn't tell them I was coming. I told myself it was a surprise, but the truth was simpler. I needed to see the situation with my own eyes. The trip felt endless. Every delay and announcement made my anxiety spike. I watched other passengers laugh and complain about trivial things, and wondered how many of them were flying toward truths they didn't want to face. By the time I rented a car and drove into my parents' neighborhood, my hands were gripping the steering wheel tightly. The house looked exactly the same. That should have reassured me, but instead it made my stomach sink. All the lights were on, glowing warmly through the windows. It looked welcoming, lived in, not panicked, not desperate. I sat in the car for a moment longer than necessary, listening to the engine hum and gathering myself. When I finally went inside, the first thing that hit me was the smell. Fresh coffee, something sweet baking, comfort, normalcy. My mother stood at the kitchen island arranging papers. She froze when she saw me just for a second before forcing a smile. "You didn't say you were coming," she said. "I was worried," I replied. "You said it was urgent." She exchanged a quick look with my father, who was sitting comfortably nearby, flipping through a magazine like it was an ordinary afternoon. "It is," she said. "Just not the way you're thinking." That's when I noticed the table. Neatly stacked folders, color swatches, shiny envelopes, a thick binder filled with labeled tabs. I didn't need to open it to understand what it was. My chest tightened as realization crept in. Before I could say anything, my sister walked into the room, her energy light, carefree. She stopped when she saw me and smiled like my presence was unexpected, but welcome. She lifted her hand as she spoke, and the ring caught the light instantly. It was large, expensive, impossible to miss. I stood there in silence, absorbing the hum of appliances and the easy rhythm of a house that wasn't in crisis. My mother started explaining how stressful planning had been, how expensive everything was now, how lucky my sister was. That was the moment clarity settled in. They hadn't called me because they were afraid. They had called because they knew I would come, because I always did, because I was the solution they reached for when something needed to be handled without discomfort. And standing there, staring at wedding plans laid out like an altar built on my fear, I felt something shift inside me. The instinct to smooth things over rose automatically, but this time it didn't win. For the first time, I didn't feel responsible. I felt aware, and I knew that whatever happened next would change everything. I finally broke the silence by gesturing toward the binder on the table. "So this," I said carefully, "is the emergency." My mother hesitated, then sighed as if I were the one being unreasonable. She began explaining how overwhelming wedding planning had been, how prices had gone up, how my sister was under so much pressure. My father nodded along, arms folded, watching me like he expected me to fall back into line. My sister leaned against the counter, scrolling through her phone, completely at ease. When she noticed me looking at her, she tilted her hand so the ring caught the light again. "Isn't it beautiful?" she said. He really surprised me. I didn't respond. I turned back to my parents. "You asked me for $50,000. You said it was urgent. You didn't tell me why." My father cleared his throat. "We didn't think details mattered. You're doing well. You can afford it." The words landed heavier than I expected. Not a request. An assumption. "For what exactly?" I asked. My mother smiled tightly. "For everything. The venue, the dress, the arrangements." I took a slow breath. "I flew here because I thought someone was in danger." My sister scoffed. "You're always dramatic." That comment unlocked something in me, something I'd kept contained for years. "I didn't make this dramatic," I said. "You did when you lied." She laughed sharply. "Lied? Mom said you'd help. You always do." I looked at my mother. She didn't deny it. "How long?" I asked quietly. "How long have you been planning to ask me for this?" My father shifted in his chair. "That's not important." "It is to me." My mother finally admitted it. "We knew if we explained it, you'd hesitate. We needed you to act." "Act, like always." I nodded slowly, letting the words settle. "And the money I've been sending every month?" Both my parents stiffened. "You said it was for medical bills, repairs, that things were tight." I gestured around the room. "Nothing here looks tight." My sister rolled her eyes. "That's different." "How?" I asked. "That money was family support," she said. "This is my wedding." I laughed then, short, surprised. "So I paid the bills and now I'm expected to pay for a wedding too?" My mother stepped closer, lowering her voice the way she used to when I was younger. "We raised you. We sacrificed for you." "No," I said. "You gave me responsibility. There's a difference." My father stood up. "Enough. This isn't a discussion. We're telling you what we need." "Need?" I pulled out my phone calmly. "I've kept records," I said. "Every transfer, every payment." My mother's face drained of color. "Why would you do that?" "Because vague answers stopped feeling safe." My sister crossed her arms. "You're really doing this now?" "Yes," I replied. "I am." I scrolled through photos but didn't show them yet. While you were telling me things were hard, you were posting pictures. Restaurants, trips, shopping. My sister's eyes widened. "You were watching me?" I was paying attention. She turned to my parents. "Tell her she's being ridiculous." My father's voice hardened. "You're crossing a line." "No," I said evenly. "I'm finally seeing it." I faced my sister directly. "Do you know how many things I gave up so you wouldn't be inconvenienced?" She shrugged. "That's what older sisters do." Something in me went quiet, not angry, clear. "Listen carefully," I said. "I'm not doing it anymore." My mother gasped. "You don't mean that." "I do. I'm not sending the money." My sister's face twisted. "You can't just decide that." "I can, and I have." My father slammed his hand on the table. "After everything we've done for you." "You mean after using my college fund for her?" I asked. Silence filled the room. My mother whispered. That was for the family. For her, I corrected. My sister exploded. You're selfish. You have a great life. What is 50,000 to you? It's the cost of my peace, I said, and I'm done paying it. She started crying loudly, dramatically. You're ruining my wedding. I didn't plan it, I said. I didn't promise anything. My mother reached for my arm. I stepped back. We already told people, she pleaded. That sounds like your problem. My father pointed toward the door. If you walk away from this, don't expect forgiveness. I nodded. That's fine. My sister screamed, You're heartless. I shook my head. No, I just stopped letting you use my heart against me. I picked up my bag. My hands were steady. That surprised me the most. This ends now, I said. No more payments, no more emergencies, no more guilt. No one stopped me as I walked to the door. At the threshold, I turned back. I came because I was scared for you. Remember that. No one answered. I stepped outside into the cold air, my chest lighter than it had ever been. Behind me, the house filled with raised voices, but they already felt distant, like something I had outgrown. The messages started before I reached the end of the driveway. Long paragraphs from my mother about family and disappointment. Short, sharp messages from my father about loyalty and gratitude. Angry accusations from my sister, blaming me for everything that would go wrong. I didn't reply. The next morning, I canceled the recurring payments. It took less than a minute. The confirmation appeared on my screen, quiet and final. A flicker of guilt rose, but it didn't take hold. For the first time, I wasn't bracing for impact. I was choosing myself. The silence that followed felt unfamiliar at first. For years, my life had been punctuated by messages, calls, reminders, and quiet expectations. Even when my family wasn't actively asking for something, I felt like I was on standby. Saying no had flipped a switch I didn't know existed. Suddenly, there was space where obligation used to live. In the days after I left, I heard nothing directly from my parents or my sister. Instead, the messages came through the family network. An aunt called carefully, her tone neutral, asking what had really happened. A cousin sent a short text saying things sounded tense and hoped I was okay. When I answered, I didn't dramatize anything. I didn't argue or defend myself. I simply explained what had happened, calmly and clearly. That I'd been asked for money under false urgency. That I'd shown up believing someone was in danger. That I'd said no when I realized the truth. Something interesting happened when I spoke that way. People listened. No one rushed to correct me. No one told me I was imagining things. Some conversations ended quickly. Others lingered, thoughtful. I didn't need validation anymore. But it was strange to realize how powerful honesty could be when you weren't trying to convince anyone. The wedding plans changed. I heard about it indirectly. The venue was scaled down. The guest list shrank. Decorations were simplified. The excitement dimmed into something quieter, more controlled. No one mentioned my name outright, but I felt its absence in the pauses between updates. Back in my own city, my routine resumed. Morning coffee by the window. Work deadlines, evenings that belonged entirely to me. The ordinary rhythm of my life felt different now, like it finally fit. At first, I kept expecting my phone to buzz with another demand or accusation. Each time it didn't, I felt a small release in my chest. The quiet stopped feeling empty and started feeling safe. One evening, sitting on my couch with the window cracked open, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for approval, not for forgiveness, not for the next crisis. I had spent so much of my life believing that family meant endurance. That love was proven through sacrifice, even when it hurt. That if I just gave enough, bent enough, stayed quiet enough, things would eventually balance out. They never had. What changed wasn't my family, it was my participation in the pattern. I didn't receive an apology. There was no late-night call admitting mistakes, no sudden clarity on their side. And I stopped expecting one. Closure didn't arrive wrapped in understanding. It arrived in the form of consistency, my own. Weeks passed, then months. The guilt faded in layers. Sometimes it resurfaced unexpectedly, triggered by a memory or a familiar phrase. But it no longer controlled me. I could acknowledge it without obeying it. I thought often about my younger self, the girl who learned to apologize before she learned to ask for anything. I wished I could tell her that saying no didn't make her ungrateful or cruel, that boundaries weren't punishments, They were protections. I hadn't lost my family that day. I had lost the version of myself they depended on. There's a difference. People sometimes ask if it hurt. Of course it did. Letting go of a role you've played your whole life isn't painless. But staying would have hurt more. Staying would have meant agreeing that my worth was measured by what I could provide, not who I was. I chose differently. And in doing so, I gained something I didn't know I was missing. Peace that didn't need to be earned. Silence that wasn't punishment. A life that belonged to me. I still believe family matters. I just no longer believe it should cost you yourself. If this story feels familiar, know this. You're not wrong for noticing patterns. You're not selfish for protecting your peace. And you're not alone in learning that love doesn't demand fear as proof. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop reacting and start choosing. That choice changed my life.